In the bustling heart of a metropolis, a formidable CEO races against the clock to secure a multi-million-dollar deal. In his haste, his expensive suit suffers a significant tear. Deeply concerned about his impeccable image being compromised before a demanding client, he hurries into a modest tailor shop, desperate for a quick repair. The moment he enters, he's captivated by the skill, artistry, and unwavering spirit of the single mother and her young son who operate the establishment. To express his gratitude for the complimentary repair, he makes a momentous decision. One that will mend not only fabric but also the burdens weighing them down. The city groaned under its own frenetic energy. Skyscrapers pierced the sky, their reflective facades catching the sharp morning sun, transforming entire blocks into a dazzling labyrinth of glass and steel. Below, the thoroughfares were a battleground. Vehicles creeping forward in agonizing lurches, horns blaring in frustration, delivery trucks jamming narrow intersections. Pedestrians moved in a frantic tide, jostling past one another, juggling coffee cups, briefcases, and the relentless pursuit of time. Inside a sleek black sedan, David Miller sat rigid, jaw clenched, fingers drumming in erratic rhythm against the leather armrest. The air conditioning hummed softly, a stark contrast to the external chaos, yet it did nothing to quell the rising heat in his chest. His eyes darted to the dashboard clock. 30 minutes. That was all he had before the meeting that could solidify his position at the apex or send him plummeting into obscurity. He exhaled slowly, controlled but taut. The deal had been months in the making. The client was a perfectionist, a woman renowned for her ruthless efficiency and uncompromising standards. A single misstep, any hint of sloppiness, weakness, or inadequate preparation, would be enough to cost him everything. His phone vibrated on the center console. He barely glanced at the name before swiping it open. The message was brief, almost taunting. Jason Harris. Peter Miller. Hope you don't get stuck in traffic. Would be ashamed to miss out. A slow burn ignited in David's chest. Of course he was on his way. Jason Harris was a predator, always circling, waiting for the slightest misstep so he could swoop in and claim what wasn't his. He was relentless, cutthroat, and unfortunately exceptionally good at what he did. If Jason arrived at the meeting first, it wouldn't just be a disadvantage. It would be a death knell for David's prospects. He straightened, scanning the road ahead. Nothing had budged, not an inch. The lanes were utterly gridlocked, an endless sea of honking vehicles stretching into the distance. He gritted his teeth. This wasn't going to work. With a sharp motion, David yanked open the car door. "Sir." His driver barely had time to react before David was already stepping out, his polished dress shoes hitting the hot pavement. "Take the car back," he said, barely turning his head. "I'll get there faster on foot." And then he was off. The moment he turned into the alley, the city's clamor softened slightly, though the air remained thick with heat and the scent of asphalt. His footsteps echoed against the brick walls as he moved swiftly but deliberately. Years of navigating the corporate world had instilled in him the importance of efficiency. No wasted time, no wasted effort. He wove through the narrow passage, dodging discarded crates, stepping over puddles of stagnant rainwater. The aroma of fresh bread wafted from a bakery's back door, mingling with the pungent odor of overfilled dumpsters baking in the sun. Then it happened. A sharp tug against his side, sudden and jarring. The unmistakable sound of fabric tearing. He stopped abruptly, his heartbeat already elevated from running, now hammered against his ribs for an entirely different reason. Slowly he looked down. The tear was massive, extending from his chest down toward his ribs, a jagged wound in the expensive fabric. David's stomach clenched. He could already hear the client's voice in his head, dissecting the implications. Sloppy, careless, unprepared. He understood how these things worked. Appearances mattered. He couldn't walk into that meeting looking like this. It didn't matter if his proposal was flawless or if his figures surpassed Jason's. First impressions were paramount. His mind raced. There had to be something somewhere. Then he saw it tucked between two old brick buildings. A small tailor shop almost invisible, its faded sign barely legible. The display window was cluttered with aged fabric, half-finished garments draped over mannequins that had seen better days. A single ceiling fan whirred lazily inside, circulating the warm morning air. Not ideal, but it was his only option. David pushed open the door, a small bell overhead chiming his arrival. The air inside was different, warmer, carrying the scent of fabric and something faintly metallic, like the lingering traces of an old sewing machine. It was quieter too, the city's chaos muffled by the thick walls. For a second he hesitated. The place felt old, well-worn, lived in. And then he saw her. Behind the counter, bent over a sewing machine, was a woman, Mary Johnson. Her hands moved with practiced ease, guiding fabric through the machine with an efficiency that could only come from years of experience. There was no hesitation in her movements, no wasted motion. She was fast, precise, professional in a way that had nothing to do with money or prestige, but pure, unshakable skill. Across the room, a young boy sat at a small wooden table, hunched over an old, tattered notebook. His brow was furrowed in concentration as he scribbled something with a pencil so worn down it was barely more than a stub. Beside him, a textbook, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed from use. The scene was simple, unremarkable even, but something about it. The contrast between the boy's determination and the woman's quiet, relentless work made David pause. He didn't have time to dwell on it. "I need this fixed. Now," he said, his voice clipped, controlled. Mary looked up. She didn't seem surprised, nor did she rush to respond. Instead, she assessed him, her gaze moving from his face to his torn jacket, calculating. Then, without a word, she rose from her stool, wiped her hands on her apron and took the garment from him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't comment on his urgency. She simply worked. Her fingers moved quickly but not carelessly. She reached into a small wooden box on the counter, pulling out a delicately embroidered flower, something she had stitched in advance. With deft hands, she placed it over the tear and began securing it, her needle moving with a speed that came not from panic but from years of practice. David could do nothing but watch. The rhythmic pull of the thread, the way her hands worked with muscle memory, no hesitation, no second-guessing, the soft scratch of pencil against paper as the boy continued his work in the corner. For the first time that morning, David felt still. 7 minutes later, Mary tied the last knot, snipped the excess thread and handed him the jacket. "Here you go." David took it, running his fingers over the flower that now covered the tear, seamless, clean, as if it had always been there. He exhaled, pulled out his wallet and froze. Only credit cards, no cash. His gaze flicked to Mary, then back to the tiny shop. The aging walls, the worn floorboards, the frayed edges of the boy's notebook. This was a place barely scraping by. He knew it, she knew it. Without a word, he reached for his hand, twisted his gold ring from his finger and placed it on the counter. "For your trouble." Mary didn't even blink. She pushed the ring back toward him. "No thank you," she said simply. Then reaching behind the counter, she pulled out a cool, damp cloth and handed it to him. "For your face," she added. "You look tired." David hesitated, fingers brushing against the fabric. For the first time in a long time he was caught off guard. But he took it, and as he walked out the door, pulling the now perfect jacket back over his shoulders, something inside him, something he couldn't quite name, shifted. The moment David stepped out of the tailor shop, the morning heat enveloped him again, pressing against his skin, heavy and relentless. The world outside had moved on, indifferent to the seconds he had lost, the minutes slipping through his fingers. His pulse was still elevated, his body wired from the sprint through the alley, the unexpected detour, the time he didn't have. He pressed the damp cloth to his face, inhaling the faint scent of detergent and clean linen, wiping away the sweat that clung to his brow. 20 minutes left. That was all. He moved fast, his shoes striking the pavement in sharp, deliberate steps, the tailored fabric of his suit settling back into place as if nothing had ever been wrong. Except something had. The sensation of the embroidered flower against his chest was impossible to ignore. It wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, the stitching was flawless. But it was there, a reminder, a quiet contradiction stitched into the very fabric of who he was. He pushed it aside. Didn't matter, not now. The corporate tower loomed ahead, all glass and steel, sterile in its perfection. The moment he stepped inside, the city noise dulled, replaced by the quiet hum of wealth, the kind of silence only money could buy. His own reflection stared back at him from the polished elevator doors as they slid open, his face unreadable, controlled. Inside he adjusted his cuffs, his collar, a final check. Sharp, professional, uncompromised. but his fingers hesitated over the embroidered flower. He dropped his hand before he could think about it. The conference room was bathed in natural light, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline, a breathtaking display of power and success. At the far end of the table sat Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who held the fate of the contract in her hands. Everything about her was curated. The precision of her movements, the sharpness in her eyes, the way she didn't waste time on anything unnecessary. And across from her, Jason Harris, already seated, already smiling that knowing, practiced smile. David didn't hesitate. He owned the room the moment he walked in. "David," Eleanor said, her voice measured, her gaze assessing. "You're cutting it close." Jason leaned back in his chair, ever so slightly, enough to imply comfort, control. "I was just telling Eleanor how much I admire punctuality. Shows discipline." David smiled, not forced, not rushed, just enough. "Good thing I'm on time then." He sat. He could feel Jason's eyes flick down just briefly, taking him in, assessing, searching. And then Eleanor. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at his jacket, at the flower. It was subtle, the way her head tilted just slightly, the way her fingers tapped once against the table as if making a mental note, a detail noticed but not questioned. Jason saw it too, and he didn't understand. That was the difference between them. The meeting began. Numbers, projections, logistics. David navigated it all with practiced ease. He was prepared, he was always prepared. But something about today felt different, not because of what he was saying but because of how he felt saying it. Confident, collected, steady. And Jason knew it. He saw it in the way his competitor's smile tightened, in the way his rebuttal came just a second too late, in the way Eleanor's attention never once strayed from David. When the meeting ended, it was done. The deal was made, the contract was his. Jason knew it too. David saw it in the way he adjusted his tie, his expression smooth but his eyes sharp with restrained irritation. "Well played, Miller," he said, his voice easy but hollow. "Guess we'll see how it works out for you." David just smiled, shaking Eleanor's hand firmly. "I think we both know how it's going to work out." As he turned to leave, Eleanor spoke once more. "That embroidery on your jacket." He stopped. Jason turned almost too quickly. Eleanor studied the stitching with interest, her sharp gaze flicking up to meet his. "Interesting detail. I like it." David held her gaze for just a second longer before nodding. "So do I." And for the first time in a long time he realized that he meant it. The morning was different this time. The same sun climbed over the city skyline, spilling gold over the streets, but the rush felt distant now, like the world had taken a step back. The traffic still moved, the noise still swirled through the air, but none of it reached David in the same way. He walked not with urgency but with purpose, his footsteps echoing against the pavement, a stark contrast to the hurried, chaotic rhythm from the morning before. This wasn't a race against time. This wasn't a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. This was a choice. The tailor shop looked just as worn as before, nestled between taller, stronger buildings. It almost felt like it had been left behind by time itself. The wooden sign overhead still swayed, the paint still peeling at the edges, its once bold letters now faded by years of sun and rain. The display window was cluttered, bolts of fabric stacked haphazardly, an old sewing machine sitting proudly like an artifact of another era. The door, weathered but sturdy, stood slightly ajar, letting out the faintest hum of the life inside. David stepped through, and the bell above the door let out a soft chime, a whisper compared to the mechanical precision of corporate boardrooms and high-rise offices. Inside nothing had changed, yet somehow everything felt different. Mary sat at her usual place, hunched over her sewing machine, the needle moving with sharp, practiced precision. There was no hesitation in her hands, no wasted effort. Every stitch, every adjustment, it all came from a place of deep, ingrained skill. This was not just work. This was survival. In the corner, Jimmy was at the same small wooden table, hunched over his notebook, completely absorbed. His lips moved slightly as he worked through an equation, his tiny fingers gripping a pencil that had been sharpened down to the last possible inch. A pencil that should have been replaced long ago. David exhaled. Yesterday he had come in as a man on a mission. Get in, fix the problem, get out. He had looked, but he hadn't seen. But now, standing there watching them, the weight of their world pressing in from every corner of the small shop, he saw. Mary glanced up, startled by his presence. "You again?" she said, though there was no accusation in her voice, just mild surprise. David gave a small nod, stepping further inside. This time he didn't have to explain why he was there. He didn't rush. He just sat. "I came to thank you," he said finally. Mary paused, a needle between her fingers, before giving him a skeptical look. "For what?" "For yesterday. The stitching, the cloth." He hesitated, eyes flicking around the room again, taking in everything he had ignored before. "For more than that." She studied him for a moment before shrugging lightly, turning back to her work. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing." His gaze lingered on her hands, the way her knuckles tightened slightly when she spoke, the way her shoulders carried an invisible weight. She was tired not just physically but in a way that years of struggle etch into a person. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "How long have you had this place?" Mary didn't look up, still threading the needle with precise fingers. "It was my mother's. She ran it for as long as I can remember. I took over after she passed." His eyes flicked to the shelves, neatly stacked with fabric that had seen better days, bolts of material carefully folded despite their frayed edges. "And business?" A quiet laugh, humorless. "You tell me." She didn't need to explain, he already knew. The tailor shop wasn't failing because of her. It was failing because the world had stopped looking, because people like him, people in his world, walked past places like this without a second thought. His gaze drifted to Jimmy, still scribbling furiously in his notebook. The boy didn't glance up, didn't acknowledge the conversation happening in the room. He was too focused. "Your son?" David asked, his voice softer now. Mary's expression changed just slightly. "He's smart, works hard. I try to put away what I can for school, but..." She sighed, rubbing a tired hand over her forehead. "There's never enough." David didn't respond right away. He let the words settle, let the truth of them take shape in his mind. She had given him everything yesterday without expecting anything in return. Not just a quick stitch, not just a piece of fabric, but dignity. And now, sitting here, he realized how little she had and yet how much she still refused to take. Then she said it, so casually, so matter-of-fact, that it made his stomach turn. "We're 3 months behind on rent." David inhaled sharply, but he didn't let the reaction show on his face. Instead, he glanced around once more, really seeing it this time. The flickering light bulb, the sewing machine, its edges worn from years of constant use, the cracked leather chair tucked into the corner. The weight of it settled over him like a slow-moving storm. She wasn't just fighting to keep a business running, she was fighting to keep a home. And just like that, the decision was made. David leaned back, exhaling slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of his cuff, feeling the delicate embroidery, a reminder of where he had been, what had changed. "I have a space," he said at last. Mary finally looked at him, eyes sharp with suspicion. "A space." "A storefront," he clarified, watching her carefully, "on the main street." Her expression hardened, as if bracing for the inevitable catch. "I can't afford a place like that." David shook his head. "It's not for rent." A beat. "It's yours." Silence. Mary stared. Jimmy's pencil stopped scratching against the paper. For the first time she looked truly unsettled. David didn't back down. "You move in. No rent, no conditions. I'll help you set it up, get the right customers in. And Jimmy," his gaze flicked to the boy, "he'll have what he needs for school." Mary's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out because this wasn't supposed to happen. People like him, corporate men, men in suits, men who moved through life calculating every gain and loss, didn't do this. They didn't see people like her. But he had, and for the first time he was doing something without a profit in mind. Mary's fingers curled around the fabric in front of her, gripping it as if anchoring herself to reality. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You don't even know me." David exhaled, his lips curving into the faintest tired smile. "I didn't yesterday. And that was enough." A week later, the old shop was gone. The peeling sign, the cracked floorboards, the dim light struggling to stay on, all of it left behind. In its place, on a bustling street where people noticed, where people came to spend, where people looked, a new storefront stood. Mary's tailor shop, fine stitchwork, custom designs. The windows gleamed. The space inside was open, inviting. It wasn't just a shop. It was a beginning. And outside, standing in front of it, was Jimmy, his backpack new, his uniform crisp, his eyes bright with something David hadn't seen before. Hope. David stood beside him, watching as Mary unlocked the door for the first time. She turned to him, eyes unreadable, a million words unsaid. He just nodded. You helped me first. And for the first time in years he meant it. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.